Welcome to the Purpose Nation podcast, inspiring conversations with Christians in science, technology, and industries of the future. For more information or to make a tax-deductible contribution, visit purposenation.org.
This is Brad Cooper with Purpose Nation, and today we are thrilled to be joined by theoretical physicist Dr. Tom Rudelius. Tom, welcome. How are you this evening?
Thanks, I'm doing well.
Tom is a young and up-and-coming physics star. He's been an athlete, and so nothing better to do than talk nerdy Christian stuff with me on a Friday night, huh?
Yeah, that's right.
I guess that makes two of us, though, so I shouldn't talk. So thanks so much for joining us, Dr. Rudelius, and looking forward to the discussion on some pretty interesting topics like faith and science, lie detector tests, perhaps we'll talk about, and there's some interesting things there. So looking forward to it. First, a little background on Dr. Rudelius. He just got his PhD and also, I believe, an MA in physics from Harvard, and is about to start his postdoctorate fellowship at the Institute for Advanced Study in Princeton. And Dr. Rudelius had, so for undergrad, I believe he had a triple undergrad major of math, physics, and statistical science from Cornell.
That's right. That's
so had to get three, couldn't decide. So you figured, okay, I might as well go for all three, sounds like. Quite an overachiever there, and he's been granted fellowships, awards. He's published many scientific papers, has given talks around the world in places like India and other places on various aspects of theoretical physics. Also, as I understand it, a bit of a sports fan, it sounds like. So what teams and sports are your favorites right now?
That's right. Well, my family's from Minnesota, so I was raised as a Minnesota sports fan across the board.
Okay.
Especially grew up playing baseball, so the Minnesota Twins are my favorite team.
There we go. Okay, so it didn't adopt the Red Sox or anything while you're up there, huh?
No, never. No.
Well, I figured that's why you'd be willing to do the talk with me right now, because I think they have a game going on right now. Okay, good. Very busy guy, but still time to take time for the sports. Okay, so give us an update. What you're doing right now and your transition here and your postdoctorate work that's coming up. What are some of the things that you're going to be working on there?
As you said, I just finished up my thesis at Harvard. I'm moving to the Institute for Advanced Study. I'm pretty much going to be continuing a lot of the research projects that I've already been working on. So I study string theory and the early universe and the relationship between the two. And there are a lot of interesting questions still to be explored.
Great, and I'd love to hear more about that. I'm going to take a shift back, though, and go back in time a little bit. So in terms of your development of interest in science and physics, is there a point in your life that you remember that you said, I wanted to be a physicist? Or was it more of a gradual transition, maybe an interest in math or science or some other area?
Right. It was sort of a gradual transition. I've been good at math and science for as long as I can remember. I've been heavily influenced by a number of teachers and professors that I've had who have really been great, who have led me down this route into academia. I was planning to go to grad school in math for most of my undergraduate career, but starting in my junior year at Cornell, I took some physics classes that I really enjoyed, and that sort of started pushing me into the more physics direction, and so that's where I am today.
Okay, and any science or math background in your family?
Not really. My dad and my grandpa both started out as engineers, but struggled once they got to fluid dynamics. My grandpa, I think, has an engineering degree, but he's now a professor in marketing, and my dad is a management consultant.
Okay, but maybe some still little analytical aspects there, I'm guessing. If there was some different, fork in the road back there in your past and you didn't go on to maybe even pursue math or physics eventually, what career do you think you'd be in? What would be your second choice right now, do you think?
Yeah, that's a tough question. Growing up, I really loved sports, and I was never good enough to actually be a professional athlete, but I would have enjoyed doing something like sports analytics, getting to do sports math, basically. Yeah, since I became a Christian in college, I think I've become more interested in questions of faith. I've also adopted sort of a more global perspective. So I think either working in the church or else working in some sort of poverty alleviation, fighting disease on a global scale would be interesting as well.
Okay, yeah, let's talk about that. So tell us about any Christian background, if there was any growing up.
So I grew up in a very non-religious family. We never went to church. I like to say that if we had a Bible somewhere in the house, I had no idea where it was. Yeah, so I never really thought too much about these deep questions of faith, really, until I got to college.
Okay. My understanding is you had a twin brother And
Sure.
as I understand it, I guess converted to Christianity. Tell us about that, and how did that sort of lead into your entering into the Christian faith?
Right. So my brother, his freshman year at Northwestern, was floor mate with a Christian guy. And it was really the first time that actually either of us had been exposed to someone who was a serious Christian who was also a serious thinker. So this kid was an engineer, and he clearly wasn't stupid, and yet he actually believed in God and in Jesus, and that was very strange for my brother. So he was just curious to know how is it that this guy, who seemed so level-headed, could believe something that to us seemed pretty crazy. So after about 9 months or so of talking with him, my brother became a Christian, and shortly thereafter he started trying to tell me about his newfound faith. He tried to give me a Bible, and I told him, look, Steve, I have trouble finding time to read books that I want to read, much less time to read books that I don't want to read. That's just where I was with faith. It just didn't seem like something that was relevant or important to me.
So some wheels started spinning, though, it sounded like a little bit.
Right. I was definitely interested in, I mean, there was clearly something that had changed about my brother. He was all of a sudden going to church. He was reading the Bible. And so there was definitely a curiosity, at least. I wanted to see what it was all about. So eventually I started reading his Bible. We had a lot of conversations about deep questions of life. I was quite hostile at times, but I did start going to church with him when we were both home over the summer, and started to learn more and more about the Christian faith.
And then you had applied for an internship, and that was a pretty interesting story. Tell us about that.
Right. So I applied for a few internships for the summer after my sophomore year, and I got an offer in the intelligence community contingent upon completing a polygraph. So I went into this polygraph, and I think my feelings towards it were very similar to my feelings towards God and towards heaven, which was, I'm a good kid, I get good grades, I've never done anything seriously wrong, I'm going to be fine. But I went in and realized very quickly during this polygraph that I was going to fail not only if I were lying, but just if I felt guilty about anything. And so for 4 hours, I shared everything that I could think of that I'd done wrong in my life. And for the first time, this Christian message that my brother had been sharing with me, this idea that I am broken and in need of a savior, started to make sense not only on an intellectual level, but on a personal level. Christianity wasn't just something that seemed plausibly true, but something that I actually needed, something that was actually worth committing my life to.
Pretty amazing. I guess churches, in hearing this now, they're going to line people up and hook them up to polygraph tests, I think, to get to think about their lives. 4 hours of that, too. So that just must have been, just an incredible experience, but also maybe exhausting. Or, maybe you can't tell us what types of questions, but I guess I can imagine they were just, they wanted to make sure they knew everything about you.
Right. They basically just wanted to make sure I wasn't a spy or a terrorist or someone who was of such low moral character that I couldn't be trusted with national secrets. The hard thing, it was really hard having convinced myself my whole life that I was basically a good person, and now having to lay it out for someone else. Really, it's sort of like taking off a mask, right, and having to just be real with someone for that long. It was extremely painful psychologically, but I think also really helped me grow in starting to see who I really was deep down.
And so was there a moment after that where you said, okay, I get all this stuff, or was it more gradual over a series of weeks and months that you sort of accepted Christ?
I would say it actually felt pretty instantaneous. Even that day, as I was reflecting on who I was and what I'd just gone through and all that my brother had been talking to me about, I said, wow, this is it. This Jesus really is someone I need in my life. So I would think the moment of conversion was pretty night to day. But of course, as a Christian, you don't just become a great person all at once. There's this long process of God changing us and making us more like his son. So I got involved through Christian community almost by accident. I was playing intramural basketball with a few guys, and one of them was on staff with a Christian organization called Crew at Cornell. And so I actually started talking to him just during intramural basketball and telling him how I'd recently become a Christian. And from there, I started actually getting involved in community.
Okay, and so you started hooking up with other Christians at the college there in Cornell. Did it change your relationship, I guess, with your other friends and also, more specifically, your career choice?
I would say not too much. in general, my friends and my family especially have all been very positive about my faith. And it's actually something I'm really grateful for, because I know that's not true for a lot of people.
Mm-hmm. How did you get involved with a trip? It sounds like you took to Haiti.
Yeah, so that was through Campus Crusade. I just, applied. I think it was about 3 months after I became a Christian that I applied, which is actually kind of crazy looking back. And when in the end things didn't work out with the NSA, I ended up going there to Haiti for a few weeks.
What was that experience like?
Yeah, so it was just after the earthquake in January of 2010, and it was definitely a life-changing experience. I think for me, first of all, as such a new Christian, someone who had never been in a Christian community, it was really a culture shock, not only being in Haiti, but also being with a team of people who had basically been in the church their whole life. So that was definitely a new thing for me. It was definitely a culture shock. But I think the main thing I'll take away from my time in Haiti was getting to meet with some of the people there who had just lost everything in the earthquake, their homes, family members, all their possessions, and we're just living in these tents. And yet we're still just praising God. And it was really incredible just to see some of the faith the people had, even in those dark moments, and to see how God, for them, was not, the source of all their problems, but rather God was their one hope. God was the one thing that they could turn to make everything better.
So was your decision to pursue physics after that, or had you already decided at that time?
I guess it was not too long after that I took this one physics class on general relativity from a professor actually named Liam McAllister at Cornell. It was just a really great class. He was and still is someone that I really admire. And so basically from that point, I decided I wanted to do that kind of physics. And in fact, to this day, I'm still working on those sorts of questions in string theory and cosmology that he really inspired me to work on back then.
Okay. I was just wondering if there was any, and maybe in the back of their mind, but if there was any, if the recent conversion to Christianity somehow made you think about some of these questions in a different way and how you could approach them.
That's true. Although I do think that becoming a Christian made me see the value in some of these deeper questions about reality. And so for someone who was trying to decide between going to grad school in math and going to grad school in physics, there was something about just the fundamental laws of nature that attracted me, I think, as a newfound Christian.
Right. Okay. So let's talk about that. You can kind of fast forward a little bit now to sort of present day and some of the exposure you've had to some of these bigger questions. You talked about string theory. I believe you worked on like some quantum gravity type issues as well. But what are some of the areas that interest you most? What are some of the biggest questions that you hope to work on?
Right. So as I say, I'm really interested in string theory and early universe cosmology and trying to connect the two. The big problem with string theory right now is that we don't have any way to connect it to experiment. But probably the best hope that we have for doing that is to try to relate it to something in the early universe that we can go out and measure. And right now, the best hope for that is probably through this theory of what's known as inflation. The theory of inflation describes this postulated period of exponential growth of the early universe. So just a fraction of a second after the Big Bang, the universe is expanding exponentially. And the hope is that somehow we might be able to take the observations that tell us about that time period and turn it into interesting information about string theory.
And are some of these things that you're going to be working on in your current studies are going to be contributing to that, do you think?
Right. So I would say that I already have to some extent. My work so far as a graduate student has largely involved trying to put constraints on models of the early universe from string theory. And I think that's a promising line of research looking into the future.
And these are mostly mathematical models. I imagine, there's thought experiments, but as you said, there's not right now a whole lot of actual experiments you can do. So, I imagine it's the work that you're doing, pretty heavy duty math.
That's right. When it comes to inflation, there's sort of two routes that you can take. There's the bottom up route where you relate inflation to experiment, and there are a lot of people working on that. And then there's more of what's called a top down approach, where you look at the mathematics of inflation and you try to relate that to these more fundamental questions in string theory. So you're right. I've been primarily focusing on the mathematical side, but the exciting thing about inflation is that since it touches on both the experiments and the theory, there's some hope that you might be able to connect those two.
So let's talk about the Big Bang. It's obviously something that I think is fairly common in the popular culture with a television show, and I think people at least have a basic idea of what it is. Talking about Christian faith here, Catholic Catholic priest, George Lemaitre, I guess, who was one of the early people who proposed ideas that led to it, I guess. But my question on this is, and I talked to a decent number of Christian theoretical physicists and other Christian scientists, and so some people would, even lay people would point to, okay, the Big Bang is somewhat evidence for the Christian faith because it sort of lines up pretty well with Genesis, in the Bible. And so what are your thoughts on that? And then maybe if you could just sort of describe it from a scientific standpoint, what do we know about it and what are we trying to learn about it?
Right. So I guess first with regards to Genesis, I think that I'm generally pretty skeptical about trying to take modern science and try to read it out of the Bible, because I think in general, especially Genesis 1 is not primarily trying to tell us about how God did things. Rather, it's trying to tell us about who God is and who we are in relation to him. I do think that there is somewhat of an argument to be made for the existence of a creator, coming from the idea that the universe had a beginning. This is the so-called cosmological argument, and it's been championed by, among other people, the philosopher William Lane Craig, who's a big fan of it. Mm-hmm. The Big Bang Theory, from a scientific perspective, is really the theory of everything after the Big Bang. So as physicists, we have this pretty decent theory of inflation. We have a pretty solid idea of what's happening after that, with up to some subtleties. But as far as what's happening before this period of inflation, the actual Big Bang itself, we really have no clue what's going on. And if anyone comes around and tells you that they have this model about how the universe started, you frankly shouldn't believe them. We really just don't have any idea what's going on, either experimentally or theoretically. Mm-hmm. So that said, what we can say with the physics that we do understand, it seems that the entire observable universe, if you go back far enough in time, the entire observable universe sort of gets scrunched down into an infinitesimally small region of space. So it certainly looks like the universe is not eternal, but rather had a beginning at some point in the finite past. Now, on the other hand, the physics that we understand is going to break down at the Big Bang, right? The mathematics become nonsensical. And so this seems to indicate that we do need some sort of other theory if we want to try to explain what was actually happening at the beginning. So I can say so far that with the physics we understand, it seems like our universe had a beginning. Is it possible that there's some physics that we just have no idea about that's going to come in and take that away? Yes, it's possible, but definitely right now the evidence points to the universe having a beginning. And if a philosopher wants to take that and try to argue that, the beginning of a universe implies a creator, I think that's an interesting argument to make. But I'm not a philosopher, and so I'm probably not qualified to remark on that aspect of it. Mm-hmm.
And so so you talked about inflation, and so one of the, I don't know if it's a requirement, but one of the aspects of the Big Bang that's sort of needed, that was proposed by Alan Guth and others, I guess it was the 70s or 80s, that required some pretty accelerated expansion of the universe very fast very soon after the Big Bang. And it sounds like that's an area that you might be working about. What is inflation?
Right. So I mean, I think you explained it pretty well right there. The idea with inflation is just that the universe was expanding at a much, much faster rate. In fact, an exponential rate in the very early universe. And this is nice because it solves a couple of puzzles, a couple of problems with the standard Big Bang model before inflation. Namely, people were wondering why the universe looks to be so flat, why the universe looks to be so homogeneous, and also why we don't observe any magnetic monopoles. And inflation solves these problems in a very elegant way, and it also has made some predictions which we since have verified. So inflation, I think, is a very elegant solution to a number of problems that were plaguing the original cosmologies.
Mm-hmm. And so let's shift gears a little bit to talk about fine-tuning. So you've talked about this as well in other places, and it's a fairly common theme for scientists in general, but for Christians in science, or in theoretical physicists, I guess, very specifically. But tell us about fine-tuning and the implications, if there are any, to a creator.
Yeah, good. If you look out at the laws of physics that describe our universe, you'll find that they have these various constants and quantities appearing in them. And the idea with fine-tuning is that if you take one of those constants and tune it just a little bit, you'll end up producing a universe that is no longer life-permitting. Likely, it'll either just have a bunch of hydrogen, or perhaps it will just collapse on itself, or there won't be galaxies, or something will go wrong that will prevent life. Now, I should say that fine-tuning itself is very solid science, right? There are very few physicists who will deny that our universe is fine-tuned. So this is not something that Christians just invented as an argument. There really are fine-tuning problems in physics, and in fact, I would say that those are the problems that most of my colleagues spend most of their time thinking about. They've really driven a lot of research in the field. The more controversial question is how you explain this fine-tuning. And I think the way that I would explain this is as follows. You can imagine some pieces on a chessboard playing chess, right? And they start to figure out the rules of their universe, their chessboard universe. They start figuring out that pawns can only move one space at a time. They start figuring out that rooks can only move along rows and columns. They find that bishops can only move along diagonals. Eventually, they start figuring out about castling and so on and so forth. And there comes a point where they've just figured out all of the laws of their chessboard universe, right? And some of the pieces say, all right, that's it, we're done. We figured out everything. Let's go to the bar and have a drink. But some of the other chess pieces say, wait a minute. Hold on. Why are we playing chess and not checkers? In other words, why are the laws the way they are? Why do we live on this chessboard universe rather than another one? And for people in our world who want to ask questions like that, why are the laws the way they are? Why do we have this set of laws and not another? Fine-tuning seems to suggest that a possible answer might be that the laws are the way they are because only laws like these will permit life. They seem to suggest that perhaps our universe is the way it is because it gives life. And some people, myself included, would say that this points to the idea of some designer, some quote-unquote God or some other designer who has intentionally created a universe that will have life in it.
And your colleagues have come to something called the multiverse, and that's, I guess, come also from string theory as a kind of a more mathematical exercise, as I understand it. But it's something that's come about that they say, oh, well, it's not necessary that you have these fine tunings for just the one universe that exists, but maybe there are infinite number of universes, right? And sort of a multiverse. Is that? I mean, I probably have described it poorly, but I mean, how would you describe the multiverse theory and how that's come about, and then maybe comment on your thoughts on it as a scientific theory?
Right. So I think you explained the multiverse pretty well. The idea is that there are lots of universes. They have different laws of nature in each one, and so the idea is that this could solve fine-tuning if as long as some universe out there can permit life, then of course life can only exist in such a universe, and so that's the reason we find ourselves living in a life-permitting universe rather than a non-life-permitting one. So what do I have to say about that? Well, I think, first of all, just as how fine-tuning is not something that was just invented by Christian apologists, it's also true that the multiverse is not just a theory that was invented to get rid of the idea of a God. So there are really some serious scientific proposals for how someone might get a multiverse. It's best not to fall off too far on one side where we're saying, fine-tuning doesn't exist or the multiverse is just this crazy theory. No, fine-tuning does exist, and the multiverse is not really such a bad idea. In fact, I'm very confident in saying that either some sort of God, some sort of designer exists, or a multiverse exists, or both. So if I were not a theist, I certainly would buy into the multiverse.
Are there any serious problems that you see with it? I mean, what are maybe one or the two that sort of the serious problems that you see with a multiverse?
Right. So that said, the multiverse also isn't solid science, right? It's definitely very speculative. To quote the preeminent theorist Nima Arkani-Hamed, who is certainly no theist, the multiverse isn't a theory, it's a cartoon, right? It's like this cartoon picture of something that we might think might be going on, but we really don't have any solid theory of how it would work. And the biggest problem facing this multiverse cartoon is something known as the measure problem. The idea with the multiverse is that anything that can happen is going to happen an infinite number of times. And if that's the case, then there's no way for us to sort of define probabilities. There's no way for us to say that we can expect to live in a universe like this. And so you somehow need to find a way to put a measure on this multiverse to figure out which universes in this multiverse are likely to exist. And the problem is that so far, I would say that all attempts to solve the measure problem are convincing only to the person who thought of them. Most multiverse scenarios are plagued with these issues of the so-called youngness paradox of why our universe is so young, this issue of Boltzmann brains. It seems like there should be far more observers fluctuating into existence quantum mechanically than there are biologically evolved life forms, and so on and so forth. Mm-hmm. So right now, it seems like all of our multiverse scenarios are as fine-tuned as the universe that we observe, if not more so. And so it's tough to say, I would say, with what we know right now, that the multiverse is really a solution to the fine-tuning problems. Mm-hmm. It could maybe at some point become a viable solution, but right now it just doesn't seem to be one.
Mm-hmm. So for you, in your conversion to Christianity and your faith, it seemed, from what I read and heard, is that it was, for you, is less of almost a less of a mind thing and more of a heart thing. So you were led by your heart, and then sort of your mind came in after maybe, some of what happened with your brother was starting to spark some things in your mind. And then following on that, though, it seemed like it was less the hands-on work that you're doing in science and physics that sort of convinced your mind, and it was more historical evidence. Is that right?
Yes, I think so. Although I should say that, prior to my conversion, I had been thinking pretty hard about these different arguments for and against the Christian faith. I'd read a number of books by both Christians and atheists, and so I think what sort of pushed me over the edge was really a hard decision. But certainly I never would have come to Christianity if I hadn't looked at the arguments for it and found them convincing.
So there was some serious research that you had been doing, and that sort of put you over the experience.
Yeah, I'd say so.
Okay. But so as far as that evidence, though, what was the most compelling thing for you, or what were the most compelling sources or evidence that?
Right. I think the thing that really appeals to me about Christianity versus other religions as a scientist is that it actually offers a testable, falsifiable claim, namely the resurrection of Jesus. And what's important, right, is that the Christian claim is that this person of Jesus was actually someone who existed, who performed miracles, who lived and breathed and died and rose again in our space-time universe, not in some far-off land of the gods. And so for me, that's, as a scientist, that was something that was really appealing. This is something that I can actually, this is something for which we actually have historical evidence. This is something I can actually get my hands dirty in data. And I'm pretty convinced that in general, history is a more reliable source of truth than metaphysics. For me, one of the main reasons I prefer Christianity over, say, naturalism is that I think that the arguments for naturalism are primarily based on metaphysical arguments that just are relatively speculative, whereas the evidence for Christianity comes from hard historical data.
With your relationships with your friends and classmates and teachers and all of that, you said that you didn't really experience any negativity per se in becoming a Christian, but did it change your view and sort of how you looked at, and were you finding more Christians now in your physics and science classes and your travels around the world? Were you sort of looking for other people who might have been believers, or kind of keeping your eye out? I guess it's sort of like, you don't really notice babies until you're a parent and you have a baby of your own, and now there's babies everywhere. Was there any of that at all?
Yes, I can relate to that. I mean, I've been fortunate to have a really great community of Christians around me wherever I've been, back at Cornell and now here at Harvard. I have been fortunate to connect with a number of solid Christians in my field in theoretical physics, and that's been definitely very encouraging and also very important to me to be able to connect and to be part of this bigger family.
So for you, you were not a believer, already pursuing science and physics, and then became a believer. And then for others, they may be Christians, maybe reluctant to dive into science potentially because maybe of a concern that, that everybody's going to be against me in that field. You're obviously finding it's not that way. There are a lot of supportive people there. And what would you do to encourage young people who are Christian believers already and praying about a calling in science?
Right. I think, first of all, Christians should never be afraid of having their beliefs challenged and with interacting with those of different beliefs. If our faith is true, and I'm pretty sure it is, then really we have nothing to be afraid of, both because we're standing on the truth and also because we have a God who cares for us and loves us. And I think really one of the most important things that we can be doing as Christians is to be embracing science and to be interacting with it in an intellectually rigorous way. I think that the reason why a lot of my colleagues tend to be more dismissive of religious faith, it isn't because they're against religion in general. They're just against it to the extent that it impinges on their life or on their research or on science in general. And so I think it's very important for us to have Christians, to have young people who are going to be embracing what we're learning from science and integrating it with their faith in an intellectually honest way. And I think that's something that's going to be a strong witness both within the Christian community, but also to the scientific community at large.
What have been some of the things you've enjoyed about your college and career so far in studies, and what have been some of the challenging things? So if somebody's considering jumping into an undergrad degree in math or physics or science, and then going on to further study graduate school, what are some of the because everyone just sort of imagines long nights in the library and very really hard exams and studying, and
right.
I'm guessing some of that's true, maybe some of it's not. But what are some of the things that you've enjoyed, and what are some of the challenging things that someone should expect?
Right. Well, being a scientist is a lot of hard work, and definitely there are those times. I think what helps a lot is having a community of other people around, other scientists, and if you're a Christian, other believers to encourage you and to help you along. I should say that I've been very blessed to have experienced a good amount of success in my studies and especially recently in my research. So for me, as you mentioned, I've gotten invitations to speak at a number of conferences and seminars around the world. And so it's been really exciting for me having people start to take my research seriously and having people, taking the research that I've done and working on follow-up projects and taking what I've done and trying to understand it better. So I think maybe this is true in any field, but succeeding in science is really fun, and getting to see all the hard work that you put in really pay off. I think that anyone who's intellectually gifted and is willing to work hard enough will get to experience that, at least to some extent.
Do you see some solutions to some of those bigger problems you talked about coming anytime soon? So coming up with some kind of a proof or something for string theory, or some of the aspects that you're working on in terms of the early Big Bang and solving quantum gravity. Or you must have some sense that have the ability to solve some of these things, I'm guessing. Otherwise, you probably wouldn't be doing it. But what's your sense of time frame and how likely some of these things are to be solved?
Right. I think part of it depends on what you define a solution to be. Right. I think it's hard to imagine having something that's just so clean that everyone just becomes convinced of it. But the truth is that that's pretty rare in science anyway. Most of the time you have some data and you have some people who are convinced and you have some people who aren't, and that's where discussion takes place. That's where research takes place. What I will say is that what I'm particularly excited about is the fact that within the next 5, 10, 20 years, the data coming from the early universe, that is the data that's relevant to inflation, is going to be getting better and better. And for us theorists, this means that the models that we're allowed to build is going to get smaller and smaller, because the fewer and fewer of our models are going to agree with data. And so I think it is an exciting time to be working on early universe cosmology, because we're really in this era now of precision cosmology. Are we going to get to a point in the next 30 years, 50 years, where we can say, aha, this is experimental proof of string theory? That seems unlikely to me. But I do think that we're going to see more and more contact between string theory and quantum gravity and observational data, and my hope is that we theorists will be able to keep up with the experimental data that's coming out.
Let's say some pretty exciting work, and you've already made contributions. At I would say relatively early in your career already, and you've been able to speak in front of a lot of colleagues around the world on some pretty interesting topics. So congratulations already on the initial success, and thankful that you had that experience and God pulled you into the fold here, and now looking at all of these things, I would imagine from the lens of a believer and a Christian, and hopefully you encourage others. So Dr. Tom Rudelius, very much appreciate your time this evening on a Friday night, and hopefully you can go enjoy the rest of your Friday night. But thank you so much for speaking with us this evening.
My pleasure. Thanks a lot.
Okay. Thank you, Dr. Rudelius, and we'll be talking to you soon.
Thank you for joining the Purpose Nation podcast. For more great interviews, resources, or to make your tax-deductible contribution to support our nonprofit ministry, please visit purposenation.org. This program is copyright Purpose Nation, Inc., a 501c3 nonprofit corporation.
that's where I am today.
Okay. And any science or math background in your family?
Not really. My dad and my grandpa both started out as engineers, but struggled once they got to fluid dynamics. My grandpa, I think, has an engineering degree, but he's now a professor in marketing, and my dad is a management consultant.
Okay, but maybe some still little analytical aspects there, I'm guessing. If there was some different, fork in the road back there in your past and you didn't go on to maybe even pursue math or physics eventually, what career do you think you'd be in? What would be your second choice right now, do you think?
Yeah, that's a tough question. Growing up, I really loved sports, and I was never good enough to actually be a professional athlete, but I would have enjoyed doing something like sports analytics, getting to do sports math, basically. Yeah, since I became a Christian in college, I think I've become more interested.
Welcome to the Purpose Nation podcast, inspiring conversations with Christians in science, technology, and industries of the future. For more information or to make a tax-deductible contribution, visit purposenation.org.
This is Brad Cooper with Purpose Nation, and today we are thrilled to be joined by theoretical physicist Dr. Tom Rudelius. Tom, welcome. How are you this evening?
Thanks, I'm doing well.
Tom is a young and up-and-coming physics star. He's been an athlete, and so nothing better to do than talk nerdy Christian stuff with me on a Friday night, huh?
Yeah, that's right.
I guess that makes two of us, though, so I shouldn't talk. So thanks so much for joining us, Dr. Rudelius, and looking forward to the discussion on some pretty interesting topics like faith and science, lie detector tests, perhaps. Where it's right now.
That's right. Well, my family's from Minnesota, so I was raised as a Minnesota sports fan across the board.
Okay.
Especially grew up playing baseball, so the Minnesota Twins are my favorite team.
There we go. Okay, well, so it didn't adopt the Red Sox or anything while you're up there, huh?
No, never. No.
Well, I figured that's why you'd be willing to do the talk with me right now, because I think they have a game going on right now. Okay, good. Very busy guy, but still take time for the sports. Okay, so give us an update. What you're doing right now and your transition here and your postdoctorate work that's coming up. What are some of the things that you're going to be working on there?
As you said, I just finished up my thesis at Harvard. I'm moving to the Institute for Advanced Study. I'm pretty much going to be continuing a lot of the research projects that I've already been working on. So I study string theory and the early universe and the relationship between the two.
We'll talk about, and there's some interesting things there. So looking forward to it. First, a little background on Dr. Rudelius. He just got his PhD and also, I believe, an MA in physics from Harvard, and is about to start his postdoctorate fellowship at the Institute for Advanced Study in Princeton. And Dr. Rudelius had, so for undergrad, I believe he had a triple undergrad major of math, physics, and statistical science from Cornell.
That's right. That's
so had to get 3, couldn't decide. So you figured, okay, I might as well go for all 3, sounds like. Quite an overachiever there, and he's been granted fellowships, awards. He's published many scientific papers, has given talks around the world in places like India and other places on various aspects of theoretical physics. Also, as I understand it, a bit of a sports fan, it sounds like. So what teams in sports are your favorite?
And there are a lot of interesting questions still to be explored.
Great, and I'd love to hear more about that. I'm going to take a shift back, though, and go back in time a little bit. So in terms of your development of interest in science and physics, is there a point in your life that you remember that you said, I wanted to be a physicist? Or was it more of a gradual transition, maybe an interest in math or science or some other area?
Right. It was sort of a gradual transition. I've been good at math and science for as long as I can remember. I've been heavily influenced by a number of teachers and professors that I've had who have really been great, who have led me down this route into academia. I was planning to go to grad school in math for most of my undergraduate career, but starting in my junior year at Cornell, I took some physics classes that I really enjoyed, and that sort of started pushing me into the more physics direction. And so